We're a little bit early, and that's intentional. Not as early as we could be. I mean, we could have started this like an hour ago, and you could have listened to us just sit around the table and talk. Tonight we not only have John and Ruth here and Janet, but we have Judy, and then we have Kelly and Kelly. Yeah, everyone ought to have some friends that have the exact same name and they're married to each other. They spell it different, but hey, what can I say? We call it, or I call them he Kelly and she Kelly. Tonight we're starting in the book of Ecclesiastes. I'm not sure how many lessons it'll be because I'm not sure how much we'll cover each week. I'm always aiming for around 20 minutes, 15 to 25. And John tells me I should cover what I want to cover, and I might do that. We'll see. During this study on Ecclesiastes, I am going to be using primarily the Message Bible. I have been enjoying my sister's devotionals out of the Message Bible in the book of Psalms this year. And I found that the Message Bible is really bringing the book of Psalms alive in ways that I haven't seen before. Now, I'm not saying it's better. The book of Psalms to me is great in almost any translation. It's a very majestic book. It's a very moving book. Highs and lows. Well, Ecclesiastes, we're going to see it's got a lot of downer to it. And I think the Message Bible really gets some of this in there. And at least twice, once tonight and once in chapter 7, and I don't know, maybe I'll do it again elsewhere. I'm going to talk about how the Message Bible actually translates it. It's a paraphrase, I get that. Actually translates it a little better than all the rest. And so, just if you want to follow the Message Bible, great. If you want to use something else, that's okay too. But I'm going to actually read the book of Ecclesiastes, stopping to talk about it as I go. With that said, let's begin with a word of prayer. Father God, I have said a few times that I've never actually written a Bible study on this book. And I pray that this one would be a beneficial one. This is a book that I'm not as familiar with as many of the other books of the Bible. So I've enjoyed learning, and I hope that this study will be very beneficial for those who are listening and watching, and that each life might be changed in just some little way to be more in tune with you, your word, and your desires for our lives. In Jesus' holy name, amen.
Amen. Ow, Bailey, that hurt.
Okay, I'm going to just read verse 1, and then I'm going to take a long rabbit trail. In the Message Bible, verse 1 of the book of Ecclesiastes, it says, "These are the words of the quester, David's son and king in Jerusalem." Now that word is Quester, not as in somebody on a quest with an O-R. And here's why I'm going to take this rabbit trail. Sometimes I kind of wonder why different translations use different words from each other, and sometimes they're very different. Now, we all know that Ecclesiastes was written by King Solomon. We get that. But it never says that in the book of Ecclesiastes, not in any translation, whether Hebrew, Greek, or English, or any other language that I've ever read, and I can only read a few. In any translation that does say King Solomon is taking liberties, not wrong. But in this verse, the King James uses the word preacher instead of quester. And we all know what that word means. The NIV uses the word teacher. Okay, we get that. Preacher, teacher. It makes sense. But let's take a short look at what the Hebrew word actually means here. And no, I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I had to look this up. But this intrigued me greatly. And so I'm just sharing with you what I learned. Important? Maybe, maybe not. But it helps us understand how come different translations are different? And in chapter 7, I'm going to actually come back and tell you why I think the Message Bible is more accurate than all the rest. And that is more important. This one is just for fun. The Hebrew word here is Q-A-H-A-L. Kahal? I don't know. It's literally a gatherer or assembler or collector. And, you know, King Solomon is referred to as teacher in other documents as well, or preacher. Not just in the Bible, but other historical documents. But the word Ecclesiastes, okay? Okay, let's stick with quester. King Solomon was a collector of information, an assembler of information. He gathered information. And that is what this Hebrew word actually means, is one who's gathering, collecting. And Ecclesiastes is actually a Latin word, and it's taken from the Greek word that was used by the translators of the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament. And that word, transliteration, means they try and take one letter at a time, like deacon, diakonos. Greek and diakonos, English deacon. So the Greek version was Ecclesiastes, and they put it into Latin, and the quester is actually from that Latin, and it means gatherer, collector. So why is this important? Well, for me, this is really important because the Message Bible, as I said earlier, is not an actual translation. It's a paraphrase. If you don't know the difference, you can go look it up. But a paraphrase is basically one man or a small group's opinion of what it says. Doesn't necessarily mean they went to the original languages. They might be working from the King James or the New International. It doesn't matter. I don't know what the Message Bible used. I haven't sat down to study that. But the point here is, sometimes a paraphrase, I and others do not always give them enough credit. And like I said, the book of Psalms, I like the way the Message Bible really brings it into the modern world. Sometimes different translations, they're kind of stilted. They don't really make it clear to the modern American. I think the Message Bible does a great job here. Okay, so what I'm saying is the Message Bible isn't very bad. I kind of like it, okay? So let's see what the quester has to say. And throughout this study, I'm going to refer to King Solomon. I'm going to refer to the preacher, the teacher. I'm going to call him quester throughout this study, just because that's what the Message Bible uses. I want to just put in one other note. In many Bibles, most Bibles, they add some section titles between, paragraphs or whatever, wherever they feel like it. At the beginning of Ecclesiastes, the NIV and the New Living Translation use a title of something like "Everything is Meaningless" for verses 2 through 11. Everything that is meaningless. That is not in the original Hebrew. That is just something they've added. In this case, it's actually taken from verse 2, and we're about to read that. The Message Bible, however, and you're going to see this throughout this study, the Message Bible says smoke. It says smoke, nothing but smoke, instead of everything is meaningless. This would not be like smoke and mirrors. You've heard that phrase maybe? Fairly common. That's more like a magician's smoke and mirrors to fool everyone. This is more like smoke, as in it disappears quickly when it leaves the fire. And that's what the quester is going to be implying when he uses the word smoke. throughout this book. So meaningless, in the NIV, New Living Translation, meaningless, that is not necessarily a bad word here. But in the Message Bible, he's going to use the word smoke. So let's read verses. Well, let's start in verse 2. And I am going to stop a couple of times. You know how I do it, if you've been here before. Smoke. Nothing but smoke. That's what the quester says. There's nothing to anything. It's all smoke. What's there to show for a lifetime of work? A lifetime of working your fingers to the bone. Now, I got to think here that somebody involved in the paraphrase of the Message Bible was a Tennessee Ernie Ford fan. Because he's got that old song, work your fingers to the bone, and what do you get?
Bony fingers.
Bony fingers, exactly. And we all know that's true. You know, the song continues, you get another day older and deeper in debt. All Americans said, oh, amen. Listen, he's saying that all the hard work you're doing in your life is just smoke. It all just disappears. It all just disappears. If you're focusing your life around your work, it just disappears. And as probably somewhere else in my notes, not here, it's been said many times by many preachers, nobody on their deathbed says, oh, I wish I'd worked more days in my life. People on their deathbed say, I wish I'd taken more time out for family. I wish I'd taken more time out for friends. I wish I'd taken out more time for vacation. I wish I'd, you know, if somebody works for me, and this has been true in my life, I encourage them to take vacation and not store it up. Because we need that period of rest. But that isn't why the quester says this. He wasn't thinking about us taking rest. He was just thinking about the end result of all we do is smoke. It's just gone. And in God's eyes, if we live to be 80 years old, that's just a puff in the history of mankind. That's just nothing. So all our work amounts to nothing. Okay, continuing on. One generation goes its way, the next one arrives. One generation goes its way, the next one arrives. And throughout this book, you're going to see this concept appear over and over again. He's basically saying nothing ever changes. It's always the same. One generation goes its way, the next one arrives, but nothing changes. It's business as usual for old planet Earth. Oh my goodness, I get that. The sun comes up and the sun goes down, then it does it again and again. The same old round. The wind blows south, the wind blows north. Around and around and around it blows. Blowing this way, then that. The whirling, erratic wind. Yeah? Especially in Wyoming. All the rivers flow into the sea, but the sea never fills up. The rivers keep flowing to the same old place and then start all over and do it again. In school, we learned about the water cycle. The water flows down the river into the ocean. The water evaporates from lakes, from rivers, from ocean. The water evaporates, falls back from the clouds, and the cycle just keeps on going. And the quester, he's got that right here. Verse 8, everything's boring, utterly boring. No one can find any meaning in it. Boring. Boring because it's all the same. Isn't it? Life keeps going. History repeats itself. We learned that in school too. The NIV here doesn't say boring, it says wearisome. But doesn't that sound like boring? You know, what's wearisome? When you're doing the same old thing over and over and over, you get weary of it. The New Living Translation says, history merely repeats itself. It has all been done before. Nothing under the sun is truly new. We get that. But here's the thing. Aren't people always looking for something new? At least Americans. I'm speaking to Americans here. or people living in America, aren't Americans in general always looking for something new, something exciting? You know, isn't that kind of what I know for our family, we like to go on vacations. A lot of times our vacations were just when we were moving, because we moved 26 times just in the 42 years we've been married. One time we're moving from Minnesota to Florida. We took, I don't know, a couple of weeks. We stopped and saw a whole bunch of tourist stuff, all new to us. And we don't go back to the same tourist spots over and over again. This is a big country, and we've seen a lot of it. And we enjoy seeing the new. Everything, verse 8, we'll continue. Everything's boring, utterly boring. No one can find any meaning in it. Boring to the eye, boring to the ear. What was will be again. What happened will happen again. There's nothing new on this earth. Year after year, it's the same old thing. Does someone call out, hey, this is new? Don't get excited. It's the same old story. Nobody remembers what happened yesterday, and the things that will happen tomorrow, nobody will remember them either. Don't count on being remembered. And except for a few exceptional people, most of us are not remembered. And in fact, you know, sports. We have these people that are given great adulation. And I tell you, in 2 generations, most of them are even unknown.
What is adulation?
Praise. You know, told how great they are. Like Michael Jordan, everyone said he's the greatest basketball player in the history of the NBA. And now there are young people today, and Michael Jordan's heyday was in the 80s, into the 90s. There are people today that don't even know anything about him. And that's 30 years. I mean, they still know his name, but they don't really know anything about him. And they don't believe he was all that great. They just think there weren't as many good players back then, because my guy on my team today is so much better. And that's true of every aspect, even in our work fields. How many people become truly famous for their work? What they did with their life in work. Count them like this, and then what? 50 years later, nobody even remembers who most of them are? Mm-hmm. Don't count on being remembered, he says at the end of verse 11. Verse 12, he says, call me the quester. And I think he's talking here about knowledge and wisdom. He was the quester of knowledge and wisdom. And we're going to see that. He says, I've been king over Israel in Jerusalem. I looked most carefully into everything, searched out all that is done on the earth. And a king of great wealth, which he was, could afford to do that. He could afford to send people everywhere to gather everything he could and learn everything he could, because he didn't have a lot to do. Jerusalem was fairly peaceful at this time, not at war with any major enemies. You know, it's humankind. There's always war of some kind. We have a way of doing that. So he says, I searched out all that is done on this earth, and let me tell you, there's not much to write home about. Oh, God hasn't made it easy for us. I've seen it all, and it's nothing but smoke. Smoke and spitting in the wind. And yeah, why don't you spit in the wind? Because it comes back in your face. Yeah, think about that. Collecting knowledge, it comes back in your face. I mean, why does he say that? Well, as we keep reading through Ecclesiastes, you're going to get the feeling that the more he learned, the less impressed he was with what he knew. He said, kings can spend time and money on whatever they choose. Oh, this is my notes. Excuse me, that's out of not Ecclesiastes. It's just saying what I almost said. Kings can spend time and money on whatever they choose, especially King Solomon, who's called the richest man in the world. Some believe the richest man in the history of the world, even including the wealthy big Bill Gates today, comparatively speaking. Wealthy people, though, if we have our eyes open, we find wealthy people are often dissatisfied with their lives. Why? Same thing King Solomon's telling us in Ecclesiastes. Because They're always trying to find something new, something different. King Solomon tried it all. And there are young, we call them jet setters, or that's a phrase from my youth. I don't know what you call them today. Call them idiots, I don't care. But all they do is spend their money and try new things and look for excitement and adrenaline or excitement from fame, whatever it takes. There's no value in it. So how can they enjoy life when their life is nothing? There's nothing to it. Verse 15, life's a corkscrew that can't be straightened. Now that's a description. Life's a corkscrew that can't be straightened. A minus that won't add up. I said to myself, I know more and I'm wiser than anyone before me in Jerusalem. See, he wasn't even claiming the whole world. He's just saying in Jerusalem. Still a rather large boast. But if you read the Bible, you know that God granted to Solomon great wisdom. And he says, I said to myself, I know more and I'm wiser than anyone before me in Jerusalem. I've stockpiled wisdom and knowledge. What I've finally concluded is that so-called wisdom and knowledge are mindless and witless, nothing but spitting in the wind. Is King Solomon boasting there when he says, I'm wiser than anyone before me in Jerusalem? Mm-hmm. Some would say yes. Well, others might say he was granted wisdom from God. You can look that up in 1 Kings chapter 3. Okay? It'd be worth going to read. But what he really asked for God, we all say God, Solomon asked God for great wisdom. No, what he asked for was discernment for ruling God's people. That's what he really asked for. And there's a big difference. Although most of us have been taught that Solomon asked for wisdom. So how could Solomon claim to be wiser than anyone? Perhaps he had innate intelligence. And because he had the time and money to study and learn. And because God had blessed him. Was he boasting? Yes, sure. But as the old saying goes, it ain't boasting if you can back it up. Right? Sometimes it's just a statement of fact. Okay? So in verse 18, much learning earns you much trouble. The more you know, the more you hurt. And I've already talked about that a little, but that's the end of chapter 1. And what a downer. You know, gee, thanks, Solomon, quester, almighty collector, teacher, preacher. The more you learn, the more you hurt. Or the more you know, the more you hurt. So is he saying that we shouldn't even be doing this study? Am I doing you a disservice by teaching? Well, I don't think so. I think we're going to see in the rest of the book that he has something very significant to teach us. And, you know, somebody else put these chapter breaks in. He didn't. And I would really ask you to read chapter 1 and chapter 2 together. See if chapter 2 is a continuation of chapter 1. Chapter 1 finishes with a downer. Does chapter 2 pick up that downer and continue it? Does it try and counteract it? What does it do? Most of us probably couldn't answer that. And I certainly, if somebody had asked me this 6 months ago, I probably would have gotten it wrong too. So don't feel bad. But read it together, chapter 1 and chapter 2, and see how chapter 2 fits with chapter 1. And again, remember, King Solomon didn't put those divisions in. Somebody else did. And I often disagree with where they put those divisions in. Especially in the Gospel of John, for instance. How many chapters begin with therefore, or because of that, or after that? Well, I got to go back and read the other chapter to figure out what we're talking about. Well, I'm giving you a hint here. You should be reading chapter 2 with chapter 1. We're going to stop here pretty much. I have some homework assignments if this were a class with a handout. And looking ahead at chapter 2, What lesson, here's the question you can always ask at the end of each lesson. For chapter 1, what lesson was the quester trying to teach us? For chapter 2, which you should read this week, what lesson is the quester trying to teach us? Okay? And as you read chapter 2, I'm going to ask you to consider this, and I'll put some notes on the Facebook group. Are you obsessed with new and better? Now, we already touched about that today. Chapter 2 is going to hit it some more. And last thought, throughout this study, the book of Ecclesiastes is not enormously long. I would recommend that you read it from front to back without interruption more than once during this study. As you're reading, if you're like me and most people, you'll be reading and you'll say, oh, I don't remember the last 3 paragraphs. Go back and start over in that area. But read it and consider it as a whole. What is the whole of Ecclesiastes trying to say? You want to have fun? Read it in the Message Bible all the way through one week. Another week, read it through the NIV. Another week, the New Living Translation. Maybe the New King James. New American Standard. Those are my 5 favorite translations. If you've never heard me, because I don't usually tell people which are my 5 favorite. Those are the 5 I use the most. I also throw in some others like English Standard Version. Just read it in different translations. See what it says to you as a unified whole, the book of Ecclesiastes. I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank everyone for watching. And if you're not watching live, I still want to thank you for taking the time out to watch it. May God bless each one of us.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.